As you've realized, it's hot outside. Last week, the Earth broke temperature records 4 consecutive days in a row. Next week is projected to be yet hotter. Climate change has propelled us into a new normal of extremes, including dangerous heat. But importantly, it's not too late to address the crisis. Joining me now is Michael Mann, Presidential Distinguished Professor in Earth and Environmental Science at University of Pennsylvania, Director of the Penn Center for Science, Sustainability, and the Media, and the co-founder of RealClimate.org. He's also the author of multiple books, including his most recent, Our Fragile Moment, How Lessons from Earth's Past Can Help Us Survive the Climate Crisis. Michael, it's good to see you again after a long time. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Ali. It's great to be with you.
I look outside in these last few weeks, and we're either dealing with the extreme heat or we're dealing with these skies that have darkened over much of America. It does present an urgency to something that you have been talking about, you and other scientists have been talking about for years. It does cause people to say, okay, this is getting out of control. What do we do now? And I guess that brings us to the question of where are we in terms of what the U.S. as a supposed leader in this has done and is doing, and are we past a tipping point of being able to live not in the way that we're living right now?
Yeah, so, where we are now is that climate change, dangerous climate change, the climate crisis is not 5 years from now. It's not 10 years from now. It's here and now. It's happening. And the question is, how bad are we willing to let it get? And you emphasize the urgency, and there's absolutely urgency. But as I like to point out, there is agency as well. There is still time to prevent the worst impacts from unfolding, but it's going to be an uphill battle at this point. Now, the Inflation Reduction Act that was signed into law by the president last year gets us part of the way there. It puts the United States on a path to lower its carbon emissions by maybe 40% or so over the next decade. So there are two caveats there. We have to lower those carbon emissions even more than 50% by 2030, if we are to have any chance of averting a catastrophic 3-degree Fahrenheit warming of the planet. So there's a closing window of opportunity. The Inflation Reduction Act doesn't get us all the way there, so we need to build on that. And of course, the climate provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act have to be implemented, and they have to be implemented on time. And there is opposition, as you know, among Republicans in Congress. And it's a reminder that we have to vote in every election. We have to turn out and we have to vote for politicians who will support these policies. Otherwise, we get this continued agenda of denial and inaction, and we don't have the time for that anymore. Well, it's too late.
It's interesting because we've made some progress on that front, right? It's not me booking Michael Mann and someone who says that climate change is either not real or not done. Not that I ever did that, but that we did this in media. I want to read a quote from you, and I want you to tell me what's interesting about this. It's your quote. The window of public discourse appears to be shifting away from the false debate over whether there is a problem toward the worthy debate of what to do about it. The reason for optimism, and optimism is important, for people to respond poorly to messages of doom and gloom that lack any sign of hope. Defeatism is indeed self-fulfilling. The important part about that is that you wrote that in 2015. You were positive then, or hopeful then, that we're moving away from the BS discussion around this and we're getting into a better discussion. But I feel like you could have written this last week.
Yeah, and it was the theme of my last book, The New Climate War, how polluters have shifted away, by and large, from denial, because you just can't deny what we can plainly see with our own two eyes. But they've shifted to these other tactics, and one of them, ironically, is doomism. If they can convince us it's too late to do anything about the problem, it potentially puts us on that same path of inaction and disengagement. And that's what Our Fragile Moment is about. It's about the lessons we can draw from the past that inform not only our understanding of the urgency of climate action right now, but the agency, the fact that we still do have time to prevent the worst impacts from unfolding, but there's no time to lose. And, here we are reaping what we've sown. I would gently take issue, by the way, with one thing that you and many journalists say, and it's understandable when we talk about this as a new normal. My colleague Susan Joy Hassel and I like to use instead the phrase a new abnormal, because this is anything but normal. And by the way, it continues to get worse. As long as we continue to put carbon pollution into the atmosphere and warm up the planet, all of this gets worse.
Well, so this is interesting because another point that you make is if we fix it, if we take emissions down to zero, the response will be immediate. That in fact, there is a fix to this. For a lot of people who say we're past the point of no return, you make the argument scientifically that we're not actually.
Yeah, and this is a common misunderstanding, and we scientists have to take responsibility for it. For years, we communicated the idea that the planet would continue to warm up even after we stop putting carbon pollution into the atmosphere, and it's related to sort of the sluggishness of the oceans that continue to warm up. But our models, the climate models that we were using those experiments, weren't nearly as comprehensive as they have become over the past decade. And now we understand that while there is that effect, the sort of lag, the sluggishness of the oceans are doing something else. They're constantly pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So if we stop polluting, those CO2 levels, those carbon dioxide levels start to come down. We lower the greenhouse effect. And all of that averages out fortuitously in a way that says that as soon as we stop emitting carbon into the atmosphere, the surface of the planet stops warming up. And it's that surface warming that's driving so much of these extreme weather events and these superstorms that we're dealing with. Now, I don't want to be a Pollyanna here. Some of the impacts are going to be longer lasting. As the oceans continue to warm, they will continue to destabilize ice shelves. We can expect sea level rise potentially for not just decades, but centuries to come, even if we stop polluting. But the idea is we can slow it down to the point where we can adapt to those changes that are now inevitable and prevent those changes which are not.
Michael, good to see you again. Thank you. As always, Dr. Michael Mann is the Presidential Distinguished Professor of Earth and Environmental Science at the University of Pennsylvania. He's the author of the important book, Our Fragile Moment, and many other books. Coming up,